7 months ago, I was sitting in my London apartment desperately refreshing the VFS website to try and get a visa appointment to move to Portugal. Now I am filming this in my apartment after living here for 7 months, and I still can't believe this is how it happened. If you're thinking about moving to Portugal, watch this video and find out about my experience of moving from the UK to Portugal and how it changed my life. Hi everyone, I'm Jessica and welcome. I share little bits of my life here, how I'm navigating my 30s and living in a new country. So I hesitated about making a video like this, a kind of advice video or sharing my experience of getting here, because to be honest, I really had no idea what I was doing. And it turned out pretty smoothly for me, but I know that it can be really different depending on where you live, where you're coming from, and just generally everyone seems to have a bit of a different experience. But then I thought, maybe some of the information will still help someone out there wanting to do the same thing, so moving into Portugal. So here are some of the things that I've learned about moving to Portugal, specifically Setúbal in Portugal from the UK. This is all with the massive caveat that this is my personal experience, and much like my life, it may be a little chaotic. So take what you need, always fact check with someone who knows way more about what they're doing than me. Number one, the why. I think it was really important to me that when I decided to move here, I had a really clear why about why I wanted to move to Portugal. And I guess most people have that why. That's what kind of motivates the move. For me, I was at the end of my tether living in London, and actually I never really felt quite right or at home living in England, no matter where I lived, and I lived in several different places. I always kind of wanted a different lifestyle. I wanted the longer months of warm, fresh Portuguese produce, to live near the sea, the slightly slower pace of life here, or the less focus on material or hustle. And most importantly for me, I chose Setúbal to live here because it always felt like home. Even the first time when I visited Setúbal back in 2016, I completely loved it. When I made the decision to leave London, I was really overwhelmed with all of the worldly options about where I could live. But in the end, I knew that I would just feel way more at peace living here. And I'm super glad that I made that decision because I just feel really good here. I could talk so much more about how this decision changed my life, it made me grow, it made me evolve, but today is a little bit less about that and more about logistics, kind of a practical guide. So let me get into it. So number two, how do you actually make the move to Portugal if you live outside of the EU? I moved from the UK to Portugal last September, so 2025, so I'll be focusing on moving from the UK specifically. Firstly, I was thinking about residency and visa. Portugal has become really popular for so many people around the world, places like the UK, the US, other Portuguese-speaking countries, and there's been a lot of immigration and the number of foreign residents has increased significantly, I think over the last 5 years. Obviously, I can only really speak to the options and experiences that I've had, but the context is important for considering the impact of being an immigrant in this country, how that impacts the local community, and perhaps considering how you choose to live here when you move, whether you want to integrate or not. So there are many different options for visas for moving to Portugal, but I would say the two most common are the D8 or the digital nomad visa and the passive income visa, the D7. I am on the D7, so in this video I'll focus on that, but the D8 is typically something where you have to show that your average monthly income is equal to 4 times the Portuguese minimum wage. So if the minimum wage is 920 euros, which I think it is at the moment, then you would need to have a monthly income averaging around 3,680 euros. The D7 is the visa I know most about because it's the one that I'm on. It typically requires you to show that you have the financial resources to support yourself for at least 1 year. This is really tied to Portugal's minimum wage again. So at the moment, I think that's 10,440 euros annually for one main applicant. That changes if there's a spouse or for children. So it's important to look at that if that would be your situation. So what did my process look like? I did the D7 route last year, 2025, and in total, it took me 4 months from gathering all of the documents, booking an appointment in the UK with the VFS, getting the rental contract, a NIF, etc., which from what I believe is quite fast, but it does show that it's possible. I also think it's important to say that I did this on my own. Many people hire somebody, a lawyer or somebody who's really familiar with the process to help them through it, and I really understand why in hindsight. There's a lot of paperwork and the policies and rules here change all the time. So it's really time consuming to do it yourself. But if you do want to try and do it yourself, it's definitely possible. I just feel like for me, it took a lot of triple checking everything, a lot of stress, wondering if I had understood everything correctly, that I had it all correctly. Many companies who offer support actually also offer a free consultation. And I did have 2 of these when I was considering whether to actually ask somebody to help me with the process. And they were just really helpful in answering some of the questions I had to make sure I didn't make any mistakes about the type of visa I needed to apply for example. So that could be a really good thing to do before you start the process too. So this is what my timeline looked like. Beginning of May 2025, going back in time, I decided I definitely wanted to move out of the UK, so booked a trip for Portugal for the middle of May to look at apartments and to open a bank account. Obviously, coming from the UK, this was relatively easy for me because of the distance. I know that it's harder for people coming from the US to do this sort of thing. I knew that the first thing I needed before I left London was to get a NIF, which is Número de Identificação, I think. And so I did this the day after I made the decision to move. And actually I researched around, but in the end, using an online service called Anchorless, I found this really super quick and efficient. You really need a NIF to do anything in Portugal, opening a bank account, securing a lease, anything really. So in the first few weeks of May, I spent all of my time on IDEALISTA, which is a bit like Rightmove or Zoopla in the UK. And I was looking for properties that I could arrange viewings for on my trip that was booked for the middle of May. I knew that I would need a rental contract before I could have an appointment at the VFS. So this is why I did it. Yes, you heard me correctly. This is a massive problem for many people because there are months sometimes where you've signed a contract for a rental lease in Portugal, but you can't live there yet because you still need to wait for your VFS appointment in the country that you're coming from. So you end up paying rent in Portugal as well as still living in your current country, paying rent there, or if you have a house there, still paying for that. This is definitely something to consider if you are looking to move to Portugal. I am sure there are ways around this, but I was not clever enough to come up with any of them, so I ended up doing exactly that. But for me, I came to Setúbal and I was looking for rental properties. Now this might look really different if you were planning to move somewhere else in Portugal, maybe Lisbon or another big city. In Setúbal, there were very few properties available and many of the real estate agents on IDEALISTA did not actually respond to me. I think it might be because I did it in English and maybe they speak Portuguese and not English some of the time, but there was one lady, thank you universe for sending her to me, who did respond and she said that she could show me 2 properties. I would definitely recommend maybe using ChatGPT or a translator to send a message in Portuguese to estate agents if you're looking outside of Lisbon, because I think sometimes it adds just an additional barrier. You can explain that maybe you don't speak Portuguese, but you're happy to use a translator. Anyway, I headed to Portugal and first went to meet my estate agent and to view the 2 properties. She was absolutely amazing and so lovely and kind, and we managed to communicate mainly via Google Translate because I only knew Bom dia. In fact, I don't even know if I knew Bom dia at that point. And she also didn't speak English. She was super patient with me, but I owe her a lot because she really stuck with me. She really helped me. The first property she showed me I didn't really like, but the second one I fell in love. That's where I am now. Woohoo! And I was like, where do I sign? I think if I was a little less naive, I might have slowed down a little here. I did it very fast, and at the time I didn't really know how important it would be to have like a legitimate rental contract to check that it was legitimate. It has to be registered with the Finanças here, which is like the tax and customs authority. So it's important that it's like a legitimate contract that can be registered. But luckily everything worked out okay for me. It did take a long time for me to get this rental contract. I think that I said yes around the 15th of May, but the company who actually owns the building or the apartment where I am renting were really reluctant to allow me to have the rental contract due to not having a visa. Again, it was this kind of idea of like, you need this before the visa, but you need this before you can actually get a visa. So it was very confusing. I was really lucky because my estate agent was able to really advocate for me, but because they were unfamiliar with the visa process, it just took a little bit of time to finish the process. So I didn't get the keys until the 9th of June. So it's a pretty long time compared to somewhere like the UK where it can be quite a quick turnaround to rent somewhere. Then I booked another trip back to Portugal to pick up my keys and get a little bit of furniture, thinking ahead to maybe moving in October or December if everything went well. Anyway, the delay with the apartment meant that I didn't want to book a VFS appointment until I knew I'd secured the rental, because I knew I would need that contract to get the D7 visa. Whilst I was in Portugal in May, I also opened a bank account in person, which was not the easiest process. Because again, they said I needed a visa to open a bank account, but I needed a bank account to get the visa. So I was stressed out, not understanding what they were talking about. And I don't know whether this is just because I was in Setúbal, and again, they might be a bit more unfamiliar with people coming here on a D7 visa. It's definitely something worth getting used to in Portugal, where often the rules change, different people apply the rules differently. So it can really depend on like the day, the person that you're speaking to in the company that you're speaking to. Anyway, eventually, after a lot of Google translating and basically begging them, they did open me an account at the bank. Yay! One thing to say about when I did get my rental contract is make sure that, like anything, you use some caution. Like, careful that they're not demanding large deposits or non-formal contracts. Something that really surprised me here in Portugal, though, is that it's actually quite common to provide 2 months of advance rent payment as well as 2 months for a security deposit. So the initial outgoing can be really large, and that's dissimilar to places that I've rented in the UK. And it might be different in different places in Portugal, but that was my experience. Another thing to consider is whereabouts you want to live, what neighborhood you want to live in, regardless of the city or the town. And this is something I think worth asking around about, going to visit places that you like to see where you feel best. So the 3 most important things: number 1, NIF, number 2, apartment, and number 3, bank account, were all sorted for me. I also decided to get a SIM card and set up a Portuguese phone number, which is really helpful for loads of different reasons. So I would definitely recommend doing that. And once I'd done all of that, I felt really confident to apply for my VFS appointment to get my first 120-day visa to enable me to start the process of the residence. So, VFS. I was looking for an appointment in VFS London for months. This can be very, very hard to get. At least at the time that I was looking, it was really hard to get one. It took weeks of me checking the website pretty much like 20 times a day with all the malfunctions of the website, which just logs you out and then you can't get in again. It was painful, actually. Again, if you hire someone to do this for you, I'm sure it would be less time consuming. Although when I asked if these companies have an advantage, like early access to the booking system, they said no, they don't. So for me, I knew it would just be quicker if I could just dedicate loads of time to checking, and luckily I had that time to do it. I did manage to book an appointment for July the 2nd in 2025, and on the day of the appointment, I made sure just to take every single document that they could possibly want. I did have a small last-minute meltdown because I didn't have the original rental contract, but they did email it over to me and they did accept this in my case. At the appointment, they just collected the documents and it was done in about 10 minutes. These are not the people that would be looking through your documents to see if you were eligible for the visa. They just collect them. I would definitely recommend really knowing what documents they need, because I think the person that I had was quite new to the job. She just asked me, is that everything, after asking for just one piece of documentation. So I was really surprised that I kind of had to be the one leading, like, no, I also have this and this and this, like the checklist asked for. You can get a checklist online, so I would definitely look at that. But also, I think it's really helpful to go onto forums, Facebook, things like that, to just check that there's been no changes that haven't been updated in that. I would say that with a little bit of caution. I found the Facebook groups to be incredibly anxiety provoking, because every time I thought I had figured it out, I would see something else that then would make me question if I was doing literally every single thing wrong. So definitely, if you're going to, just take what people are saying with a pinch of salt. Sometimes people will comment from different countries where the process is slightly different and it doesn't necessarily apply to your situation. So, on the 1st of August, one day before my birthday, I got my acceptance, and I was so surprised because I thought it would take many, many months, or I thought that they would reject it because of the rental contract thing. The official deadline is 60 days, but I've heard that it can take a lot longer than that. So I booked a flight for the 1st of September, packed up all of my things, sorted out transport for my cats, and within a month, I was off to Portugal. One thing to consider here is that often the time between your arrival, or like your VFS appointment, and your AIMA appointment, which is your residency appointment, can be really long. For example, my 120-day visa was granted by the VFS and it started in October because that's when I thought that I would be moving here, which means that my 120-day visa ended in February, but my AIMA appointment given to me, which again was lucky because sometimes people don't get one, they have to contact AIMA, and I know it's really stressful and really effortful. However, either way, my AIMA appointment wasn't until April, which is soon. That means that I can't leave Portugal between February, when my visa runs out, and between getting my residency card or my AIMA appointment, which would be in April. So, Other things I found out since moving to Setúbal in Portugal. I moved in September, which means I had to lock down for the winter, and what I realized is that the buildings here in Portugal are not really winter friendly. It's not super uncommon to have mold or for it to be really cold inside or damper. They don't have central heating, so that was something really different from the UK. It's really helpful to open your windows through the winter to ventilate your space, use dehumidifiers, and I also really like using an electric blanket in bed, but this was something that really shocked me. Even though the winters are definitely milder here in Portugal, the inside temperature can be colder than outside through the winter. Another thing that I've learned is that electricity is quite expensive here. So I've definitely found myself minimizing the amount of appliances or electrics that I'm using. Sometimes the electric also cuts out when it hits a certain point here, like using the oven and the kettle at the same time. And I quite like this, to be honest. It does make me feel a bit more intentional about how I choose to live, what I choose to use. But occasionally at 8 p.m, when I'm cooking, and I've got 1,000 things happening at the same time, and the electric goes off and the lights go out, and I'm there in the dark having to reset everything in the middle of cooking, it can be extremely annoying. I am getting used to it though, and I'm pretty sure that if I called the company to ask them to up the allowance that I have, it would actually be fine. But here we are. Another thing is getting around in Setúbal has been really easy. I don't own a car here, and I'm lucky enough to mostly be able to get Ubers or walk everywhere. It's really walkable here. It's much flatter than somewhere like Lisbon. But again, that would be something to consider about like how you would get around in the city or the place that you choose to live in Portugal. And an obvious factor about moving to Portugal is language. And for me, this is really the most important part of my move to this country. Portugal does have a really high number of people who speak English very well. I've noticed that in Lisbon, there's a lot more English spoken. People will almost speak to you in English for the first time rather than starting in Portuguese. However, one of the reasons I chose to live in Setúbal was because I knew it would force me to speak more Portuguese and I would learn better. And I really think if you're considering moving here, for me, it's super important to be able to try and learn the language, to try and integrate better with the culture. Here in Setúbal, there are people that speak English, but there are also situations where I do need to use Portuguese, where somebody doesn't speak English. And to be honest, now I only really use Portuguese, my limited Portuguese, to communicate. I just try to get through and do that even if I know the person speaks English. However, there are things in Setúbal that are in English, things like fitness classes, activities, that sort of thing, which is a really nice option too. One thing I found out recently is that in the cinema here, they don't dub movies unless it's a kids movie, so they show the movie in English with Portuguese subtitles, which was kind of shocking and also a really good language learning lesson because you're listening to the English and reading the Portuguese at the same time. I was like, oh, now I can just have an excuse to go to the cinema every week as a lesson. There are many more things that I could talk about that I've learned since moving here, but this has already been quite a long video for now and I want to keep it practical. If you have any questions about more specific things about moving here, especially from the UK to Portugal, because that's been my experience, please let me know in the comments. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe, and thank you so much for watching. Sending you so much love.